What if the people who frustrate you the most aren't just annoying, but are actually mirrors, showing you truths about yourself you'd rather not face? Have you ever wondered why certain people can push your buttons so easily, as if they were born knowing exactly where your weak spots are? And what if I told you the real reason you keep letting them back into your life isn't loyalty? It's not even love. It's something far more dangerous. Seneca once said that everything that irritates us about others is not just a nuisance, it's a lesson, a reflection, a mirror. But here's what he didn't say out loud. Some people are masters at pushing buttons. They're like professional irritants, trained in the art of stirring chaos inside you, and the real reason you keep opening the door to them, it isn't love. It isn't loyalty. It's hope. A dangerous kind of hope. You're not addicted to peace. You're addicted to the fantasy that if you love hard enough, if you wait patiently enough, they'll finally wake up. That one day they'll look at you and suddenly they'll understand. But Seneca already knew the truth. They won't change because they're not confused. They're consistent. Every time you explain yourself to someone who has no intention of listening, you're handing over your power. Seneca warned us, "He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens." The very moment you stop performing for their approval is the moment you begin to awaken. That's when life truly starts. Toxic people only win when you keep reacting. But there is one powerful move that flips the entire script. And once you learn it, they will never bother you in the same way again. So if this touches something deep inside you, don't scroll past. Hit subscribe, drop a comment, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because what I'm about to reveal could change the way you deal with toxic people forever. You don't need to yell. You don't need to defend your heart to people who have already decided not to hear you. You don't have to keep justifying your intentions to those who twist your words, no matter how softly you speak. Some people aren't searching for truth. They're searching for control. And every time you respond, every time you over-explain, every time you give them access to your emotional clarity, you feed a cycle that leaves you drained and them empowered. Seneca understood this long before psychology gave it a label. He didn't use words like shadow self or emotional dumping ground, but he knew exactly how human nature operates. When people refuse to take responsibility for their actions, they project that chaos onto the nearest person who feels too deeply to walk away. That person is often you, and that's how you slowly become the emotional trash can for someone else's pain, shame, and hidden self-hatred. The cruel irony? The calmer you try to be, the kinder you try to act, the more you prove you're not their enemy, the more they take from you. Not because they're lost, but because they know exactly what they're doing. This is what Seneca warned about. Psychological inflation. When people begin to believe their ego, their impulses, and their rage are justified simply because they feel them. And when you respond to them, when you meet them at that level, you only inflate their ego further. You're not solving conflict, you're fueling it. We just saw how every reaction you give to toxic people only fuels their ego. Now let's go deeper. You're not only trapped in a toxic cycle, you're actively reinforcing it. With every explanation, every justification, every attempt to make their behavior make sense, you're feeding the very fire that burns you. And this is where Stoic wisdom delivers its sharpest lesson. You don't owe chaos your energy. You don't owe unreasonable people even a single drop of your inner peace. Seneca wrote about this in a way that cuts deeper the more you've lived through emotional manipulation. He believed that true power is found in self-control. Not in cold detachment, but in the deliberate decision to guard your mental space from those who haven't earned the right to enter it. He knew that silence, when chosen intentionally, is not weakness. It's discipline. It's a quiet form of war. And let's be honest. If someone disrespects you and your first instinct is to explain yourself instead of leaving the situation, something deeper is happening inside you. Maybe you were raised to believe that love means fixing broken people. Maybe you were taught that your worth is tied to being the bigger person. But here's the truth. That instinct to soothe, to calm, to make everything better, it isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just self-abandonment disguised as virtue. Stoicism offers another path. It reminds us that we can't control what other people say or do. We can only control how we respond. You can't stop them from lying, manipulating, belittling, or ignoring you. But you can decide whether you give them your attention, whether you allow them to occupy the front row of your life, whether you keep showing up to arguments that exist only to drain you. And let me be clear, this doesn't mean shutting down. It means leveling up. It means drawing a line in stone, not in sand. It means declaring that your peace is not negotiable. You can walk away with dignity instead of staying in a fight designed to strip you of yourself. That is the Stoic way. Not passivity, but mastery of the self. Look around your life. Think of that person who always creates a crisis, but never takes accountability. Think of the one who lashes out, then demands that you fix their mood. Think of the one who only says, "I'm sorry," after you've walked away, not when they've actually caused harm. Now ask yourself, what are you teaching them when you stay? When you explain, when you comfort, when you repeat the cycle, you're teaching them that your boundaries are flexible, that your self-respect is negotiable, that your silence can be bought with just enough guilt or chaos. Seneca never believed in fixing people who refuse to grow. He believed in building an inner strength so deep, so rooted, that nothing external could shake it. That's what he meant by true freedom. Not freedom from pain, but freedom from being enslaved to reaction. So the next time someone tries to bait you into justifying your worth, don't take the bait. Don't reach for logic. Don't reach for calm. Reach for stillness. That's the move they'll never expect. That's the power play they cannot touch, because in the end, you don't win by shouting louder. You win by walking away with your peace intact and your values unbroken. At the heart of it all, it's not about them, it's about you. What you tolerate, what you teach, what you choose, and what you finally decide to release for good. Now let's move forward. Because once you understand the next part, psychological inflation, the entire game changes. They don't feed on your heart, they feed on your reactions. Your emotional energy is their fuel. The louder you get, the more they win. The more you defend yourself, explain your choices, or justify your needs, the more power you hand over. According to Seneca's teachings, this is what he would call psychological inflation. The moment your energy expands to wrap around someone else's chaos, you begin to lose yourself. Toxic people don't care whether you're praising them or fighting them. What matters is that they still live rent-free in your mind. They only want proof that they still have the power to move you. And when they get that proof, they grow, bloated with the illusion of control. Seneca believed that understanding others always begins with understanding ourselves. But manipulators twist this wisdom. They don't use it for self-reflection. Instead, they study you. They observe your patterns, they memorize your emotional weak spots, and they wait for the right moment to strike when you're most vulnerable. It's not always conscious, but it is always calculated. They weaponize familiarity. They know the exact tone, the perfectly timed pause, the subtle phrase that slips under your defenses and ignites a response. And once you react, once they've cracked the surface of your calm, they win again. You might think silence makes you weak. Seneca would tell you the opposite. Silence, when chosen, is a form of control most people never master. It's not passive. It's deliberate. It's restraint transformed into a weapon. In Stoic philosophy, silence is the shield of the wise. Not because you have nothing to say, but because some people are unworthy of hearing your truth. Choosing not to engage is not backing down. It's stepping outside of a cycle designed to drain you dry. This is what Seneca meant when he spoke of sovereignty of the self. He may not have used the modern word individuation, but the principle was clear. Psychological sovereignty, the right to rule yourself, the inner discipline to stay clear even when emotional grenades are thrown at your feet. He believed no one should be allowed to disturb your peace without your permission, and once you truly grasp that, everything changes. Think about it. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling small, defeated, even though you stood your ground? That's because the battle was never fair to begin with. You weren't speaking to someone who wanted understanding, you were speaking to someone who wanted control. The moment you started defending your worth, you gave them the outcome they were chasing. Seneca would remind you that the wise never waste their breath, proving their value to those who refuse to see it. And the stronger you grow, the more your silence speaks louder than any defense. Silence tells them they can no longer shake your inner world. Silence says, I no longer play games where I lose either way. So let's get practical. Think about someone in your life who constantly pulls you into emotional conflict. Maybe they don't scream or throw things. Maybe it's more subtle. The perfectly timed sigh, the backhanded compliment, the cold silence that leaves you feeling guilty enough to chase after their approval. It could be the coworker who always finds a sly way to question your competence in front of others, or the friend who never forgets their own boundaries but conveniently overlooks yours. And here's the trap. You think you're taking the high road by staying calm, by explaining yourself, by giving endless second chances. We saw how manipulators study you and twist your reactions to feed their control. Now let's go one step further. What happens when you stop giving them fuel? Because every time you react, you're not only acknowledging their behavior, you're validating their tactics. This is exactly where Stoicism offers its hardest-hitting guidance. Stop feeding the fire. Walk away, not with bitterness or drama, but with quiet authority. You don't have to slam the door. You simply don't open it again. Seneca wasn't interested in revenge or emotional scorekeeping. He taught that real power lies in self-governance, in refusing to let someone else's chaos dictate the stability of your own mind. So here's the solution. Master your response. Reclaim your energy. Stop explaining. Start observing. When someone tries to trigger you, pause. Ask yourself, is this reaction worth my peace? 9 times out of 10, the answer will be no. And the more you practice this pause, the more untouchable you become, not cold, not distant, but deeply rooted, like a mountain that doesn't flinch in a storm. Because the goal isn't to make them understand. The goal is to stop needing them to. That's psychological sovereignty. That's what Stoicism builds in you layer by layer, choice by choice. Let me ask you this. Think of that one person who always finds a way to get under your skin. What would shift in your life if they could no longer affect your mood? If they could no longer steer your day or live rent-free in your head? Drop your answer in the comments. Let's talk about it. This isn't just philosophy. This is freedom, and you deserve every ounce of it. In the next part, we'll break down how to apply this mindset in high-stress environments where walking away isn't always an option. Work, family dynamics, long-term relationships. Because once you master that, you don't just survive these spaces. You dominate them without ever raising your voice. 3. Psychological sovereignty. Silence is not weakness. It's power. It's not avoidance. It's a psychological full stop. A locked gate between you and the chaos someone else is trying to drag you into. Seneca understood this deeply. He believed silence wasn't about retreating from confrontation. It was about refusing to bleed for battles created solely to feed someone else's need for control. And here's a truth most people miss. The most powerful person in any room is rarely the one speaking over everyone. It's the one who has mastered the art of restraint, the person who speaks less but is heard more. That's psychological sovereignty. It's when your peace is no longer up for negotiation, when your energy is no longer up for auction. Every time you explain yourself to someone who thrives on your confusion, you trade a piece of your clarity for their chaos. Seneca understood this long before the word gaslighting existed. He warned that not everyone deserves access to your inner world. And the moment you start explaining yourself to someone who doesn't genuinely want to understand, you're not being heard. You're being studied. They're listening for leverage, listening for your weak spot, not to understand, but to dominate. This is how manipulators work. It's not random, it's a system. They get close enough to learn your patterns, how you react when you flinch, what makes you overthink. And then they twist it. And every time you engage, you invite them deeper into your mind, your emotions, your sense of self. Seneca would say, "You've allowed someone to rearrange the furniture in a room they don't own." That's how you lose sovereignty, not in one dramatic moment, but in 100 small, subtle responses that chip away at your inner stillness. Let me give you an example. A woman named Elena shared how her sister constantly provoked arguments over trivial things, then spun the story to make Elena feel like the aggressor. Every time Elena tried to clarify, to explain, to smooth things over, she ended up more confused, more drained, more resentful, until one day she stopped. She didn't argue. She didn't text back. She didn't show up for the bait. We saw how Elena stopped taking the bait and walked off the stage, leaving her sister's manipulation to collapse under its own weight. Now, let's see what that really means for you. Just like that, the game fell apart. The manipulation stopped working, not because her sister changed, but because Elena did. She reclaimed her energy. She stopped handing over her mind. This is exactly what Seneca meant by owning your mind. Psychological sovereignty isn't about never being hurt. It's about refusing to keep handing the blade to the same person who cuts you. You want to disarm a manipulator? Don't react. Don't correct them. Don't chase closure. They can't twist silence. They can't flip what you never gave them. The moment you go quiet, they lose their grip. Because suddenly, they're left with the one thing they've been running from all along: themselves. Seneca believed that the most terrifying thing for the average person is to truly face themselves without distraction. Manipulative people rely on your reactions to avoid doing just that. If you don't give them your energy, they're forced to sit in their own chaos. And most of them can't take it. That's why you'll notice toxic people panic when you don't respond. They'll push harder, escalate, guilt trip, play victim, or provoke new drama. Anything to drag you back into the cycle. But if you stay silent, not out of fear, but out of mastery, you starve the cycle. The story ends. There's nothing left to twist. No role left to play. You've left the stage, and now they're performing alone. Seneca believed that the highest form of peace is inner stillness that no one can disturb. And in a world constantly demanding your attention, your opinion, your reaction, choosing not to respond is revolutionary. You don't need to post about it. You don't need to prove you're right. You don't even need to block them in anger. You simply disappear from their psychological radar. Let them sit in the silence. Let them hear the echo of their own behavior. Because here's the part most people struggle with: letting go without needing to be understood. The Stoic path isn't about getting the last word. It's about realizing that the need to be understood by the wrong people is its own kind of bondage. You don't need their understanding to heal. You don't need their apology to move on. What you need is to stop participating in your own emotional exhaustion. So let me ask you this. Who in your life are you still explaining yourself to? Who keeps pulling you into conversations that leave you feeling smaller, unseen, unheard? And more importantly, what would happen if you just stopped? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. This is how you begin to rebuild your boundaries, not just with others, but with yourself. And in the next part, we'll explore how to maintain this silence, not just as an escape, but as a long-term strategy for psychological freedom. Because once you claim your peace, you have to learn how to protect it. 4. Stop. Stop replying. Stop explaining why you've gone quiet. Let them talk to your absence. Let them sit in the silence that follows their chaos. According to Seneca's understanding of human nature, silence is not emptiness. It's communication. It is precise, sharp, and deliberate. It says everything that words no longer need to carry. You no longer have access to me. That isn't bitterness. That's boundaries. And in a world constantly demanding emotional availability, this is an act of psychological rebellion. Seneca once said, "Your vision becomes clear when you turn inward." You can't see your own path if you're constantly staring at someone else's demands. That's why Stoic philosophy emphasizes clarity instead of chaos, presence instead of performance. Yet toxic people thrive on pulling you into performance. They act confused about what they've done to hurt you, not because they genuinely don't know, but because pretending not to understand keeps you explaining. And as long as you're explaining, they're in control. Seneca understood this manipulation for what it truly is, a tactic. Not always conscious, but absolutely effective. The longer they keep you talking, reasoning, justifying, the longer they avoid accountability. And more importantly, the longer they stay in power. You think you're clarifying. You think you're being mature, but they know exactly how to keep you hooked by acting oblivious just long enough to pull yet another explanation out of you. It's psychological control masked as confusion. That's why your silence is so disruptive. When you stop giving them anything to respond to, they lose their script. They can't manipulate what you didn't say. They can't flip silence into guilt the way they twist your words. And here's where Seneca's Stoic wisdom cuts deepest. You don't owe anyone access to your mind just because they've grown used to it. You don't have to keep people in your life simply because they demand a response every time they feel uncomfortable. Emotional access is a privilege, not a right. We often make the mistake of thinking our boundaries don't count unless we announce them out loud. But the truth is, boundaries aren't about the other person, they're about your own clarity. You can say nothing and still draw a line. You can go quiet and still send a message. In fact, silence often says it best. It tells them, I no longer participate in dynamics that cost me my peace. That's the kind of inner stillness Stoicism calls us toward, peace earned through choice, not conflict. Think about it. If someone only stops hurting you when you finally raise your voice or break down crying, that's not a relationship. It's a trap. And if they only respect your boundaries after a dramatic confrontation, then they never respected you at all. They just feared the consequences. Seneca taught that power doesn't come from how loudly you speak. It comes from how firmly you hold your ground. You don't have to slam a door to close it. You can walk away without noise, without anger, without drama, and still never return. Start treating your mental energy like what Seneca would call psychic gold. Rare, valuable, not meant for everyone. Not everyone deserves to hear your thoughts. Not everyone earns the right to influence your emotions. If someone drains you, undermines you, or constantly twists your intentions, you don't need a final conversation. You don't need to craft the perfect message or wait for the right moment to leave. You just stop. Quietly, clearly, finally, stop thinking you owe them closure. You don't. They already know what they did. That's the part most people don't want to admit. Toxic people always know. They may not own it. They may deny, deflect, or distract. But deep down they know. They test your boundaries on purpose. We saw how toxic people deliberately test your boundaries because deep down, they already know what they're doing. Now let's uncover what really happens when you stop giving them the reaction they crave. They push, not because they're unaware, but because they want to see if you'll fold. And every time you explain, they win. Every time you justify, they gain ground. But when you say nothing, when you withhold the reaction they're hunting for, they're left standing in front of a mirror they've been avoiding their entire lives. And that mirror is the one truth most manipulators cannot handle. Without your emotional labor, they're stuck with their own reflection. Seneca believed that most people will do almost anything to avoid true self-confrontation, even if it means destroying someone else's peace. That's why they cling so tightly to your reaction. It's not love, it's distraction. You are their escape from themselves, but here's the turning point. You don't have to play that role anymore. The moment you stop responding, you begin reclaiming your psychological sovereignty. And that's where the healing starts. Not in convincing someone else to change, but in changing the way you give away your energy. Next, we'll explore methods to reinforce this silence, not as a temporary break, but as a permanent boundary. Because maintaining peace isn't just about what you walk away from. It's also about what you consciously protect every single day from the inside out. If these insights resonate, let me know in the comments by simply typing yes. Your thoughts matter, and I'd love to hear from you. 5. Silence. Silence is what breaks the cycle. Not words, not confrontation, not another long explanation given to someone with no intention of changing. Silence ends their psychological game, not because it avoids conflict, but because it refuses to feed it. According to Seneca's wisdom, silence is not passive. It's what he would call an active choice, a conscious, powerful decision to choose yourself over someone else's chaos. It's not avoidance, it's clarity. Silence is the line where your peace finally takes precedence over their need for control. People will call you cold when you go quiet. They'll say you've changed, and they're right, because they were never warm when they had access to you. They thrived on your tolerance, your explanations, your second chances. They liked the version of you that tolerated emotional harm and disguised it as compassion. But that version is gone. That version is what silence buries. What remains is someone who understands their worth so clearly that there is nothing left to prove. And that's exactly what manipulators cannot handle. Because toxic people don't want resolution, they want residence. Not solutions, but space in your mind, your heart, your thoughts. The moment you stop reacting, they vanish, not by accident, but by your will. Seneca taught that true power is never loud or dramatic. It's self-contained. He knew that silence is a kind of awakening, a shift where your energy no longer leaks toward those who cannot hold it with care. When you stop speaking, it's not because you have nothing to say. It's because you finally realize they were never listening. Not really. They were only waiting for their turn to twist your words and use your openness against you. Silence means you've stopped handing them material to work with. There's a woman named Morgan who lived this truth. For years, she explained herself to her emotionally abusive partner. Every slight, every argument she tried to fix with calm reasoning. She gave space. She gave time. She gave benefit after benefit of the doubt, but nothing ever changed. Every word she spoke became another opportunity for him to deny, distort, or deflect, until one day she went silent. Not from exhaustion, but from resolve. She stopped answering his messages. She didn't explain why. She didn't write the long letter. She disappeared, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And for the first time in years, she saw him clearly, not as someone seeking healing, but as someone clinging to control. That silence was her freedom. Seneca believed peace doesn't come from being understood by others. It comes from understanding yourself. That's the heart of Stoicism. You don't have to scream to be heard when you already hear yourself clearly. When your internal voice grows louder than the noise around you, you finally see what deserves your energy and what doesn't. You realize not everyone should have access to your heart, your time, or your mind. Your attention is your life force, and wherever it flows, your emotional power follows. Some people don't deserve to flow through your inner world anymore, not because they're bad, but because they're reckless with what you offer. Silence is not weakness. Silence is individuation. Silence is psychological sovereignty. It is the awakening that happens when you recognize that reacting to someone's chaos only multiplies its power. When you go silent, you step off their stage. You refuse to let your peace be disrupted by someone who feeds on confusion. That isn't coldness, it's clarity. Seneca knew that true power is internal. It cannot be stolen. It can only be given away. And the moment you stop giving it to those who misuse it, you reclaim it in full. Your silence isn't the end of your strength. It's the beginning of your freedom. The most powerful move you'll ever make isn't screaming, blocking, or writing a public goodbye. It's silence. The kind that comes from knowing your worth so deeply that you no longer argue with people committed to misunderstanding you. When you go quiet, you don't disappear. You rise. You stop leaking energy into black holes and start choosing peace like your life depends on it, because it does. Toxic people don't fear confrontation. They fear irrelevance. And the moment you stop reacting, they lose all power. So if this struck something raw and real inside you, don't let it stop here. This is your moment to reclaim your space, your strength, and your voice. Through silence, you are not cold. You are clear. You are not rude. You are rooted. Hit subscribe if you're ready to protect your peace like it's sacred. Like this video, if you've ever been drained by someone who didn't deserve your energy, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and drop a comment. What's the one thing you're finally ready to stop explaining to people who never listen? Let's talk about it below.